It's not going to pay your mortgage, bruv, or your student loans. Yeah, things like history, reading the great epics, philosophy become absolutely redundant. Reduce the human being really to just an economic unit at the service of the market, and it's really the reduction of the human being to just being the servant of the economy. More traditional worldviews basically state the opposite, which is that capital is at the service of the economy. The economy should be at the service of the human being. Our problem is not that we lack elementary education. The problem is that our education has become alimentary. We view education as a means to basically get a job that enables us to barely survive and pay our mortgage and, get our one holiday so that our wives can, put pictures on Instagram and do selfies in, Dubai or Kuala Lumpur or whatever. People have this mentality of like, okay, do I need to learn from, the history book to basically pass the exam and get my GCSE or my A level so that I can get to a good school and become a pharmacist or a dentist or whatever, so my parents can get proud and get me a rishta. And you know what I mean, right? You have to turn your body into that of a god, of a Greek god. That's required of you. The body lives in reality, and the body is always honest. And you may talk a lot about spirituality, but your head or your absence of muscles will say something else. What does it mean to be a lion? What does it mean to have the type of charisma of Raw that when you speak with such authority, even if it's just one sentence, that an entire room listens to you and takes notes and respects it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Illuminating Dialogues 35, where I really have the honor and pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Francesco today. Thank you, Dr. Francesco, and welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine. I'm very honored to be part of this.
Yeah, thank you for joining today. And the reason actually I came across your work, like I just said, was actually Dr. Kamarup's live stream. And we had Dr. Kamarup previously on the podcast. And I think you just blew my mind on so many levels. I think the amount of depth you've went through. I think there's many other people my generation who are really seeking for understanding on our background. And you seem to enlighten so many areas that I never even knew I wanted answers to. So for that, I'm very grateful, and I'm sure my mind will be blown in this dialogue itself. For viewers who are not familiar with yourself, would you like to give a short background into, um, into kind of yourself,
Yeah.
your studies, and just enlighten the viewers about your background?
Cool. So I'm Dr. Francisco José Luis. So I'm from Luxembourg. My parents came from Portugal and migrated to Luxembourg around the time of the 1974 revolution in Portugal. We come from a very old tradition of anti-communism. So my both for material, but also for, let's say, for other reasons, we migrated to Luxembourg. So I come from a working class background. And so, yeah, after completing my primary and secondary education in Luxembourg, I moved to Paris to do two separate BAs and two separate MAs, one in comparative literature, the other one in Indo-Iranian studies. I mean, it's the diploma says South Asian studies, but South Asia here includes Iran and India. And so my area of interest is the exchanges between Iran and South Asia, and to some extent also even Tibet, which is what I'm doing at the moment. And so after completing these two master's degrees, one of them was on Sikhism already. I moved to London to do my PhD at the School of Oriental and African Studies, and under the direction of Professor Christopher Shackle, who's a celebrated authority in Sikh studies, because he basically wrote the grammars that you need in order to study the language of Gurbani. So he has this very important book called An Introduction to the language of Gurbani, of the Sikh scriptures, which is an essential book for anyone who's serious about studying Gurbani. And he also wrote the dictionaries that come with it, and several other articles, focusing on language. So I was very lucky to have someone from the old school of academia. So someone who wasn't, let's say, ideologically possessed, as unfortunately many academics are nowadays. Someone who really focused on, proper scholarly, work and a philological approach to text, meaning that if you want to study a religious tradition, you have to first of all master the languages of that religious tradition. And it's one of the basic rules. Like, for example, if you want to study Christianity, you need to know ancient Greek. If you don't have an ancient Greek, that don't forget about it. Which is one of the reasons, for example, that a lot of people objected to Jordan Peterson, getting a position either at Oxford or Cambridge, because he's not philologically equipped to talk authoritatively about either the Gospels or the Old Testament, because he doesn't know Hebrew, he doesn't know Aramaic, and so on and so forth. So it's one of the basic rules in this type of scholarship, is that you need to first and foremost master the languages of the tradition you're studying. Now, in the case of Sikhi, I was very lucky that in Paris I had studied Sanskrit, Pali, and Braj, and Hindi, and that I had started basically with Persian as well, and then later on with Arabic.
Wow.
And when it comes to Sikhi, you need to have a firm grounding in those languages. Gal eya ke, like Loki Kendene, like Sikhi is, it's a simple religion. It's like, well, maybe in practice it is, but if you want to study Gurbani seriously, you need to have a firm grounding in Sanskrit, in Braj Bhasha, in Sadhukari. You need to know, you need to also know Persian, because many of the writings of Guru Gobind Singh are in Persian. And you need to have a good knowledge of Arabic as well. Without that, you can't authoritatively call yourself an authority in Sikh studies. And unfortunately, there are many people going around with, calling themselves, like authorities on Sikhism who haven't done the work. They just rely on the fact that they know Punjabi and that's it. But Punjabi it's like nowadays we identify Punjabiyat with Sikhi, but that's a very recent thing. In the 17th century, if you spoke of Sikhi, there were Sikhs in Punjab. There were also Sikhs in Assam. There were Sikhs in Bengal. There were Sikhs, big communities.
Wow.
To the point where the Catholic Jesuit missionaries who were writing about the situation of India at that time, they spoke of the gurus as the Pope of the Gentiles, because Sikhi was so much bigger than it is nowadays, right?
Okay.
And the guru was almost like a competitor to the temporal authority of the Mughal emperor. The Sikh guru was way more than people nowadays think he was. The gurus were people of tremendous spiritual charisma, and who had disciples, everywhere in northern India, not just Punjab, but Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Nepal as well, Assam, Bengal. Big, there were a lot of Namdari, Nanak Bandi communities, like the Sikhs before the Khalsa, basically. There were a
Okay.
lot of these communities around. And a lot of people ignore that. And so it's not enough to know Punjabi to know about Sikhi, because very little actually of Gurbani is actually written in Punjabi.
And I think that's a really important point to note as we just start like having this framework or this context that you've just laid out. Because for the viewers listening, like me, they might just come from UK and might not necessarily have this, let's say, this framing. And it's only because I've researched a little bit.
Sorry?
So thank you for creating this context. I think we broke
Yeah,
up a little bit. Thank you for
yeah,
creating this context and framework, because
yeah,
people of the community, for example, me, third generation Sikh with my Nannaji, my grandparents, has emigrated 1950s. Now we're looking through this very weird frame, trying to reconnect, right? Which is why I really resonated with how you laid it out. And I was very surprised that in the way you're talking about Sikhi, in that I've never really seen, if I've gone to the Gurdwara, I've never seen it spoken that way, for example. So if I can just rewind back,
yeah,
hopefully in this podcast, I would love to delve into a dialogue around capitalism, perhaps neoliberalism, neoliberalism. Perhaps people who
yeah,
are not familiar with this. I'm an engineer, not so familiar with these terminologies. Perhaps our education system, the reformations around Sikhi pre-colonial understanding, and then if we have time, talk about the Indo-European societies, the
yeah,
visionary that was Guru Gobind Singh, what he really envisioned the Khalsa to be, and hopefully, paganism, intelligence, and the West versus Europe. A lot there. We'll see how it goes. But this is illuminating dialogues. It's really a space for us to journey together in a flow of meaning, dialogue, and hopefully illuminate ourselves and hopefully the listeners as well in the process. So my first question to you would be, what lights you up?
Um, it's the quest for wisdom.
Hmm.
It's the quest for knowledge, but meaningful knowledge. Because there's a beautiful in Arabic,
Hmm.
the word for the world is alam, and alam comes from this three-lettered root, alama, which means which also gives the word ilm, knowledge.
Hmm.
And with the rules of Arabic grammar, alama basically means the thing through which you get to know something, meaning that the world exists as a almost as an avatar or as an icon that leads you to something else, meaning that the world is made of a series of signs that you have to study in order to understand what is behind it. And what is behind it is basically the divine. So since I was a kid, I never had this, I never understood this division between, religion and, secular life and arts and sexuality and martial art. For me, all of that has always been one, always.
Hmm.
And so I've never seen music or sexuality or politics or anything like that. I've never seen these things as being separated from the divine. And so for me, in order to understand the world in which I live, um, I try to follow my ancestral archetype, which is Odin. Odin gave up his eye to get the knowledge of the runes, and he hung for 9 nights, from the cosmic tree Yggdrasil. And with that, it's the idea that knowledge can only be acquired also through sacrifice and sometimes intense suffering. But for me, it's this idea that I need to understand the world in which I live in, and also to understand myself as well. it's very important. And therefore people are very much surprised. I actually talk to all kinds of people, like from very, very diverse backgrounds. And this comes from something that I've learned from the Buddhist tradition, which is that everybody you meet is the Buddha. Everybody you meet has something to teach you. And like even though I'm an academic and so on and so forth, a lot of people tell me that when we sit with you, we never have the impression that you feel superior to us. And that's because deep down, I have this attitude that everyone has something to teach me. Even people who've not had any formal schooling, they have a lot to teach me. So, for example, so my wife is Iraqi, right? And so I live in Baghdad, and basically her grandmother was the eldest person in her family, and so she worked really hard to help her siblings so that they could study. And they've become Air Force pilots and doctors and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, she was never able to go through proper education. But so one day, my wife and I were visiting the shrine of Imam Musa al-Kadhim, one of the imams of the Shi'i tradition. And so they're selling these Qur'ans where you can use an electronic pen to basically recite the verse
Ah.
you place it on a specific verse.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife's grandmother basically, decided to do a full reading of the Quran that way and to give the rewards to my grandmothers. And so my wife said, but that his grandmothers were they're Catholic. And then my wife's grandmother said, well, aren't Catholic people just another form of Shias like us? So she didn't see the separation. And this is this lady who is in her 70s who's grounded deeply in reality, who's worked with her hands her entire life, who's grounded in reality, and has been able to see through the bullshit of dogmatism. And so someone like that, for me, that's a guru as well. And so, it's the quest for knowledge. It's the quest for understanding. It's most importantly the quest for wisdom. And I'll sit at the feet of anyone who has something to teach me, irrespective where they come from.
Amazing. And it's that learner mindset. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I would love to start on maybe just to build a frame for people, especially people my generation, on just our education system. Because for me, I've just come out of university 3-4 years ago, and so I'm trying to grapple with this kind of reality that I've been cast into almost. And I feel like a lot of people our generation are trying to do the same. And I really resonated with one of your posts, and hopefully we'll try to deconstruct what is really a totalitarian neoliberal takeover and neoliberalism itself. What really is capitalism in the context of why we're using the word enslavement for those who do not see this as obvious or even offensive, depending on their conscious level, in that system. So I'll read out one of the quotes from the blog, and hopefully we can start to have a dialogue on this. So, having a list of the best universities as a best place to get a piece of paper known as a bachelor's degree, which will then allow them to enter the neoliberal job market, its wage slavery, and its programmed destruction of human dignity. Since its takeover by the corporate world, the university has become an extension of this obscene farce and has, as a consequence, sold its very soul. Anglo-Saxon universities are the instrument of power through which entire generations of citizens are transformed into de facto slaves through the imposition of exorbitant tuition fees that force most students to take student loans, which they have to pay back. Thankfully, we don't have this in Scotland, but that might sound for some people a bit like, whoa. But I'd love to first start with what does, might be a bit of a loaded term, but what does neoliberalism really mean in this context? And how can you start to frame our education system and this blog for viewers who may not be familiar with what's going on currently?
Yeah. So liberalism is a type of philosophy that emerged in Europe, and especially in England, after the so-called wars of religion between Protestants and Catholics. There was this idea that we couldn't get people to agree on theology, so therefore the only thing on which society should be, the rules of society should be based on is uh, you know the common good, but through economy. As Voltaire used to say, when it comes to money, everybody is of the same religion. And so liberalism, what it tries to do, it tries to free, liberalism means, comes from liber, which means free in Latin. It's to free the economy and the exchanges of it between human beings of all kinds of limitations, be it from the state or from religion or other types of forces. And then you already see what the dangers that are entailed in this sort of philosophy. And neoliberalism is basically just a new extension of this philosophy that tries to do away with the last types of traditional restrictions that were placed, that were still there on liberalism, to be able to reduce the human being really to just an economic unit at the service of the market. For liberalism, the human being is at the service of the economy, and the economy is at the service of capital. And and therefore, the entire education system is geared towards producing people who are suited for that type of vision of the world. And so in that vision of things like history, things like, reading the great epics, things like having a proper understanding of philosophy become absolutely redundant, because you don't need that if you just, it's not going to pay your mortgage, bruv, or your student loans, yeah. And it's really the reduction of the human being to just being the servant of the economy. Whereas more traditional worldviews basically state the opposite, which is that capital is at the service of the economy, and the economy should be at the service of the human being. And it's a very, very different vision of things that unfortunately is not the one that is driving our lives. But the problem with this sort of neoliberal takeover of education is that people have lost sense of critical thinking, and because they have no sense of critical thinking anymore, they're very liable to be manipulated by the mainstream press or state narratives. And so, I mean, we've seen that, for example, with COVID, right? Where millions of people basically fell for this entire thing. And, overnight, people were snitching on their neighbors and even family members, not asking themselves critical questions, which is that, for example, you need something like 10 years to develop a vaccine for any disease, right? And, so I'm not someone who's against vaccines. I'm not one of these types, but I'm just someone like, I was brought up to ask questions and not to take things at face value, because there are things like, for example, Nuremberg Protocol that was created right after the Nuremberg trials, by which it is, and this is in international law, whereby governments are not allowed to impose a medical treatment on their citizens without informed consent. That's international law. And if you have no education in history, if you've not been taught critical thinking, right? For example, in my days, so the education system we had in Luxembourg was copied from the German system. And so we had 4 years of philosophy in secondary school, right?
Wow.
We had a thorough training in history and these sort of things. So we were trained to be aware of these things and to ask questions. And I remember my teachers kept saying, like, never take things at face value, always ask questions. And we were trained to ask, okay, if an event happens, right, who's profiting from it? Right? Whereas nowadays, people have this mentality of like, okay, what do I need to, what do I need to learn from, the history book to basically pass the exam and
Yes.
get my GCHE or my A level so that I can get to a good school and, become a pharmacist or a dentist or whatever, so my parents can get proud and get me a Rishta and you know what I mean? Right?
Exactly.
And the thing is, this is a very, with so there's this, how to put it, our problem is not that we lack elementary education. The problem is that our education has become alimentary, meaning that we view education as a means to basically get a job that enables us to barely survive and pay our mortgage and get our one holiday so that our wives can put pictures on Instagram and do selfies in, Dubai or Kuala Lumpur or whatever. And it's sad because that's not that's not the purpose of education. Education should be a weapon at the service of the citizen in order to make sure that tyranny never sees the light of day, so that you can question Keir Stammer and say, well, you're bullshitting us and you better stop. This is what the purpose of real knowledge should be. The citizens should be armed, in the sense that, and this is a concept that I like about the United States, which is that, it's the idea of the armed citizen, which they also have in Switzerland. I think the Swiss have a more responsible way of dealing with it, by the way. But also knowledge is a weapon. And what has happened, especially after World War II, is that education systems, especially in the Anglo-Saxon sphere, have basically disarmed their citizens from the very possibility of challenging the authority of the state by feeding people this sort of this sort of alimentary version of education. Well, Johnny's got to get an education in order to become a very successful banker. And why on earth should he learn about the history of Europe? This is all nonsense. He doesn't need that. This is all for, fancy boys who want to go to a liberal arts college and become actors. But Johnny's responsible. He's going to become a banker. And no, if you are a citizen, you have to and you have the right to vote, then you can only do so responsibly if you have knowledge about the things of the affairs of the state. And so if your government in your name, using your taxes, goes abroad to basically wage war on another people, you better know what's going on, right? I mean, the last 2 weeks have been very traumatizing for me because our next door neighbor, Syria, has just been going through a horrible event, which is the takeover of the, you know, the Syrian Arab Republic by basically a new version of Al Qaeda. And we're seeing now we're seeing now every day examples of beheadings of Christians and Alawis and other minorities, and it's all being bankrolled by the Anglo-Saxon West and to some extent even the European Union. And it's being done with people's tax money, and it's tragic. Also, that as these subjects are being written away or dumbed down in the secondary school system, what has happened is that at the university level, the level of education has also gone down as well. When I was teaching in Canada, I noticed this. I mean, there's no comparison possible between, for example, German university students and university students of, for example, in North America. There's no comparison whatsoever, because the difference is the following. In Germany, there are no tuition fees. University is actually free, but you need to earn your place into the system by having, really good marks. One of the conditions to enter university, and especially the humanities or medicine, is that you need to have done 6 years of Latin.
Wow.
And if you want to go into medicine, you need to have done 2 years of Greek as well. And you have to also take courses in ethics, right? Because it's seen as as a doctor, you need to sometimes take, very, very fateful decisions regarding, the fate of your patient. And you need some sort of grounding in ethics in order to justify your decisions, right? It's a very serious business. So what happens is that in Germany, it's only the very best that get into university. Whereas in the Anglo-Saxon world, is the people who either have the money or the people who can suppress the anxiety about, paying their loans back, that basically enter the system. But there's no check on quality, and that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem, and we're seeing the quality of the universities go down, and it's tragic because if the people who are supposed to be the elites of the country cannot think right, then basically the entire nation just is bound to basically go down to hell with them.
Hey everybody, sorry to interrupt your podcast, but if I could please ask you to take the time to like and subscribe to this channel. It would help us as we try to grow this channel and share our guests' deep wisdom with you and the rest of the world. What lights you up? Why do I ask this? Because I want to create a space for you to go slow to go far and offer a space of one-to-one coaching, and I'll put some testimonials up here. This will allow you to access all of the wisdom for our illuminating dialogues, actually integrate and implement this wisdom in your daily life for whatever means you'd like to transform, live in alignment, live in purpose, and of course live in your dharma. If that resonates with you, you can book a session directly with me on Jhoty.com. If you would like to join the free community, you can also go to Jhoty.com. All the links are in the description, and connect with like-minded people, where we also have a chat about the next Illuminating Dialogue podcast episodes. So thank you again, everybody, for supporting this podcast. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this podcast. Yeah, thank you for drawing the boundaries of the game almost like very colloquial firstly, and then actually drawing that into the state level and how that happens. And hopefully we'll get into this as well about in the ancient times how ancient civilizations did this, and Guru Gobind Singh's vision as well. But before we get into that, I would just love to also ask about your view on our education system with regards to like Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time. I don't know if you've looked at this. I was also in Aristotle's Lyceum last year, and I
Mm.
believe that his Lyceum was actually paid by the government to take young men and do things like philosophy, metaphysics, wrestling, things like this that we just don't have these days. And you did write a quote that I found really fascinating, which was a parody of the rose window of the cathedrals where the logos has been replaced by the idols of neoliberal entertainment industry, an industry whose task it is to deliver the ideological message of consented slavery of neoliberal world, where all traditional ties of religion, family and culture are effectively loosened, I guess. So,
Yeah.
um, with that being said, I'd love to have a conversation around, people might not be familiar with logos, first of all, so we can talk about
Mm.
this. But then also, um, how did how how did the ancient world's education system or were backed versus was actually influencing our educational models at the present? Because I don't think we've talked about the influence of universities and secondary schools.
Well, I mean, it all depends on the civilizations, of course, but the primary purpose of education was to create leaders who would be able to, you know, raise society with them. And so that is why, for example, so I was asked a few years ago, I was asked by the sister of the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, to create a project for the re-establishment of the recreation of the University of Taxila, which is the oldest university in the world, right?
Wow.
And with that also a project to rehabilitate the Buddhist pilgrim routes in Pakistan, and this was seen as also a project to change Pakistan itself, because if you're opening these pilgrimage sites for Buddhists from East Asia, that also means that you have to change the very country itself in terms of its attitude to other religions and so on and so forth. And there was a great deal of enthusiasm for this project. Unfortunately, Imran Khan was basically removed. But the when you take a place like Taxila, the things that were taught there were in what we would call the trivium, right? So grammar, logic, and rhetoric. A leader. Why do you need grammar? You need grammar in order to have the faculty of analysis. Because what grammar does is that it takes language, and then it asks you to basically analyze language. What is an adjective? What's the function of an adjective? And how do you place the adjective? Why are words placed in a specific way in a sentence? So you have all these rules that you have to study. You're not just learning them because of language. It just you're basically learning analysis. So, for example, when I was in secondary school in Latin, the first thing we would do before we would even translate the text is go through a word for word analysis of the sentence. Where's the verb? Where's the subject? Where's the object? What kind of object is it? And so on and so forth. And only after having done the full analysis of the sentence were we allowed to even translate. So what does, it gives you analytical skills. Now, these analytical skills need to be combined with logic. So, you'd learn formal logic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, because a leader needs to be able to, use logic to ask the appropriate questions regarding, specific situations. And then a leader needs also to be able to inspire, and that's why you need rhetoric, right? You need the art of being articulate, because the art of being articulate enables you to move people, and we have many examples of people who are able to move in millions of people just by their speech, and that's a remarkable skill, right? And so that's what was taught. What was taught was, you were not taught to become an element within an economic exploitation system. You were taught to be a complete human being, because on top of all of that, you were also taught, martial arts, medicine, and so on and so forth. And you were also taught, with, of course, rhetoric, you were also taught the epics of your own, of your own people, right? So, and with that, the history of your own people. So you're taught to be rooted within the history of your own lineage, and to care for your own, for your own people, and you're taught to organize the living space of your people in such a way that you're basically a tree on whose branches your people basically are supposed to find shelter. And at the same time, you're growing as well, and with your own growth, your people grow as well. And so that's basically what education was there for. It was to create a complete human being. One of the great manuals of ethics for the ruling class was a Persian manual that was used from Istanbul to Agra. It was called the Akhlaq-e-Nasiri, the Nasirian ethics. The Nasirian ethics go back to a great, Persian, well, I'll try to say Iranian philosopher, Shi'i philosopher by the name of Khaja Nasruddin Tusi. And so he wrote this book of ethics on how to educate, on how to create leaders. And that incorporates, the things that I've mentioned, logic, grammar, rhetoric, the study of history, the study of societies, martial arts, medicine. And the ideal is what we call in Arabic, insan kamil, the complete human being, and it's to make you, a complete human being, because by being one, you are able to understand the different components of your society, right? That's why, for example, as much as one may criticize the Ottoman Empire and its onslaught on Europe, one also needs to recognize that many of the sultans of the Ottoman Empire were remarkable leaders. And what's really interesting about them is that all of them were required to have to master a manual craft. So, for example, Suleiman the Magnificent was a jeweler. Others were, for example, the last great Ottoman Sultan, Abdul Hamid II, was a carpenter who actually made made most of the furniture for his palace.
Wow.
Right. And the thing is this, and in the ethics of Sufism, this manual work was combined with prayer. So as and so each profession had the patron saints. For example, the patron saint of carpenters was Noah, Prophet Noah, right? So and there are entire manuals of what we call futuwa, so chivalry. These manuals of chivalry. So in the medieval times, or sorry, in the pre-modern times, in that part of the world, each profession had its own manual. So, for example, there's one manual from India, from the Mughal period, of calico printers.
Okay.
So these people who print these patterns on cloth. And so, what the way it was done was this, is that, when you reached the age of, let's say, 14, 16, you were adopted into the guild of, let's say, the calico printers. And so you had to undergo this ritual whereby you wear this breeches, and you had to drink water from a bowl in which 3 pinches of salt were put in that water. And the 3 pinches of salt represent the divine law, the Sharia, the spiritual path, the tariqah, and then spiritual truth, the haqiqah. And you made a certain number of oaths, being honest, her working hard, and praying, and so on and so forth. And then you were taught the secret meaning of your profession, which is really interesting for the calico printers. It was, your heart should be as pure as the white cloth that you're working with. And as you're printing the pattern on the cloth, print the name of God onto your heart. And so what happened is that, manual work was combined with prayer, so that there wasn't a separation between, praying at, let's say, at the mosque or at the temples and so forth, and then your work. It was seen as basically the same. It was, you were always in a mode of worship. It's just that it just changed depending on the hours of the day. And this, of course, means that the way work was seen as worship, and we've lost that. We don't see work as worship. We see work as a way of basically paying for our expenses, but there isn't this idea that work is an act of worship. And neoliberalism killed that, because one of the things about liberalism is that it cuts off human life from its transcendent and divine dimension. So work is just work. There's no spiritual dimension to it. And when you do that, of course, there's a certain number of problems that come with it. Because here's the thing. I mean, this is a problem that appeared in Germany. So in Germany, a few years ago, there was this woman who was jobless, and so she goes to the job center. And in Germany, if you want to receive, if you want to receive your allowance from the government, if you're jobless, you need to go to a job center. And the job center told her that there's a job for you. Okay, what's the job? The job is being a hostess at a sex club. And if you refuse, you won't get your allowance from the government. And here's the thing. Well, if work is just work and values are just personal things, then working at a sex club as a hostess is just another job like anything else, right?
So your whole value system is even
This is a
taken
real
out.
case, by the way. This is a real case. And so, when people say, well, religion is just values that you have, on a personal level, yeah, and whatever you do at home, that's fine, but it shouldn't be made public. But that's liberal thinking. But there's a good reason why they say that, because for liberal thinking, religion is just a hobby, you know.
And it separates the meaty beady, because so far actually in this episode, in this podcast series, we've been looking very deep at the beady, which is the beer, which is the spiritual wisdom. I think this is one of the first podcasts that we're diving more into the meaty side, the political angle, which is very important. Um, but when we're in a system where we're trying to have work or our job as a form of devotion, but that system doesn't encompass that task in itself can be very hard, because essentially we're trying to do a task with worship, but at the end of the day, it's not going towards a higher progression, right? So that in itself becomes broken in that system. So I think that's a very interesting point that you highlighted.
Yeah. Because one of the one of the things that people forget, especially about Guru Gobind Singh, is that Guru Gobind Singh was deeply steeped in the Persian classics. And one of them is the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. And one of the very first stories in the Shahnameh is precisely about this issue. It's the story of Fereydun and Zahak. Zahak is a man who killed his father. His father's name was Merdas. He was a very rich and popular and charismatic and king. And so his on the council of Ahriman, the devil, uh, Zahak kills his own father, and he gets seduced by the devil. And I mean, to cut the long story short, he becomes basically possessed by the devil, and you have these two snakes that come out of his shoulders. And these two snakes need to be fed every single day with the brains of two young men. And and Zahak basically represents plutocracy. It's the power of money, of non-productive capitalism over every other function in society. Zahak perverts the women of the former king. He persecutes farmers. He persecutes workers. One of them is the famous Kaveh, the blacksmith, whose apron becomes the imperial flag of Iran, by the way. And Feridun is this descendant of Jamshid, the former king, who has to take refuge in the forest and who's being fed by this miraculous cow by the name of Barmaya. And so Zahak kills Barmaya as well. And so what happens is that Feridun and Kaveh join hands, and Kaveh leads this popular uprising against Zahak. And Feridun basically, has a magical mace, a gurs, that is shaped in the head of it's shaped like a cow's head as a sort of revenge for the death of Barmaya. And he beats Zahak, but he doesn't kill him.
Okay.
What happens is that he imprisons Zahak under the Mount Damavand, which is not far away from Tehran. Why? As a reminder that evil is always lurking, and it's always sleeping, and it's always there. It's trying to imprison people. This is a founder of Iranian civilization. Now, the thing he's doing is that he combines within himself the three functions. He's a warrior. He's also a physician / shaman, and he's tied to the world of the farmers and the craftsmen. These are the three Indo-European functions. And whereas Zahak represents, plutocratic, non-productive capitalism that is only able to stay in power by destroying the brains of young men, by perverting women, right? And by demanding a sort of legalistic allegiance, because what he does, he asks of people that they, that they sign a document stating that he's the best king that ever existed, right? So it's the type of power that requires people to acknowledge it in a sort of very legalistic and bureaucratic way. It's plutocracy, bureaucracy, sexual perversion, the destruction of education. It's all there in the myth of Zahak. And people who want to uphold this ideal of Feridun, which is what Guru Gobind Singh was really all about, there's only one solution, which is that, we have to beat Zahak. We have to beat the Serpent King and bring him back to his cave in the mountain Damavand, and where he'll have to remain until the end of the world. And that's what's happened with modernity is that we've allowed Zahak to come out, and it's the modernity in many ways has been the freeing of Zahak, of plutocratic neoliberal tyranny. And we're seeing everywhere. I mean, like the oppression of the farmers everywhere in the world, be it in India, be it in Europe, be it the trucker protest in Canada, right? There's a real oppression against the people, against the productive class, against the people who work with their hands to feed us, right? And so, and the thing is, history repeats itself, and and I think that Guru Gobind Singh, was very well aware of it. And what he was trying to do with the Khalsa is create a spiritual lead that is able to move that is able to lead that movement towards the liberation of people from this sort of tyrannical power.
So powerful, and it speaks to the powerful of that stories. People who are not familiar with non-productive capitalism, um, destroying the brain of young men and perverting women, what could you expand upon that? Because that might not be so clear to people listening to this, what that
Yeah,
actually means in
yeah,
terms of our
yeah,
society in a grounded way.
yeah. So productive capitalism is it's the type of economy where something is actually being produced. So, for example, if you like Henry Ford, and you have a factory that produces cars, and at the same time you make sure that your workers have decent wages and they can afford housing and a good education, so on and so forth. That's productive capitalism, right? But what's important here is that you're creating something. Non-productive capitalism it's as it says, it's a type of capitalism that creates wealth but without producing anything, and that's basically usury-based banking, uh, real estate, and in general, of course, also the service economy, right? Of which, for example, prostitution, pornography is also part of it. And so that's why that's why the mirror class of the plutocratic elite has always been the lumpen proletariat, the non-productive underclass, because they're just a mirror image of their leaders. It's just that they don't have the same level of wealth, but they're into the same type of degeneracy, right? And that is basically what is being promoted nowadays through our mainstream media. If you grow up as a young man, in the late 90s, beginning of the beginning of the 2000s, you'll notice that the ideal man and the ideal woman that are being portrayed in the mainstream media, especially on MTV, it's basically, it's the thug and the slut. These are the two archetypes that are being projected, and a lot of people have fallen for it, and they've allowed themselves to go through this. They allowed themselves to be taken, to be possessed by these archetypes that destroy societies. I mean, and I know how this whole gangster rap culture has basically destroyed the Punjabi youth in Canada, in the UK, and in the United States. There are a lot of, I've seen this myself as a professor. I've seen young men who had so much potential, and because of peer pressure, it's all gone away because of this, because of this takeover of popular Punjabi culture by this gangster rap culture, and it's just sad because I just happen to have a better ideal of what the Sikhs used to be, right? And it's sad. It's really heartbreaking, and it's destroying families. It's creating a lot of unhappiness. It's creating a situation where we've basically where crime has become not just normalized but also idealized, right?
Mm.
I mean, we have criminals in Canada who are opening gurdwara. I mean, it's just nuts. I mean, drug dealers will open up gurdwara. Um, and it's heartbreaking, because when you see at what level, Sikh people were at the height of the Sikh Empire under Maharaja Ranjit Singh, right? I mean, as I said before, under Maharaja Ranjit Singh, there were in Lahore there were books being printed in French, which meant that there were people in Punjab who were reading French. Like, I want you to like really like drill this into your minds, because we have this idea like that's basically, I mean, the popular image we have nowadays of the Punjabi is, the Bhangra singer, who, with loads of, girls around him, and guns and so on and so forth. But that's, I mean, I think that 200 years ago, nobody would have imagined something like that being like the ideal of being a Sikh, and or even a Punjabi, the ideal for Punjabi manhood. Whereas, like under the reign of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, like people, like education was free for everyone and actually obligatory. So, and a lot of people were bilingual, trilingual, and a lot of them knew English, knew French as well, and then, so how did we come? How we go from there to this?
Yeah, and
And
that's
the answer is clear. It's not just colonialism, because the thing is this: at the height of the British Empire, do you know how many white British people there were in India?
I believe not too many compared to the actual Indians itself.
Yeah, there were max at the height of the British Empire. There were 150,000 white British people, most of whom were just officers, which means that through the power, the manipulation of narratives and of technology, they were able to manipulate these millions of Indian people into being part of their game, right?
And that's kind of where I wanted to go next. And you painted that picture very beautifully. So if we like rewind into the 1800s, you've got, and I was reading some of Pant Prakash as well, where David Dr. Looney is working his way up. And so you've got the British, let's say, sitting outside of the outskirts of the empire. Maharaja Ranjit Singh's there. What is the mindset and intention of the colonial British for the reformist movement? I don't know if they've even thought of it at this stage. And then how did they impact the culture there? Because, of course, it wasn't just, okay, just let's just take down the culture. It was like very carefully planned, it seemed. Like the Sikh arts, you mentioned the library, there was also an Anandpur library, the warrior, Nahangs, and the institutions themselves. So if you could also paint that picture, because people like me, people the background we come from, we don't really see the civilization having different arts that are flourishing. But actually, I know that a core component of a genocide could be also a cultural genocide to control people.
Yeah.
So if you could also paint that picture as well for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So one has to know that when we speak of colonialism, one should never forget that, and this is going to shock a lot of people, but colonialism was something that was promoted by the European left. Yeah, the
Wow.
European right, be it in France, be it in England, was not interested in colonialism, for the very simple reason that they were not interested in exporting their own civilizational model, because most of them were what we call differentialists, meaning they recognized that there were different ethnic groups and civilizations in the world, but and they were happy with the fact that each one had their own civilization, and the Europeans had no business projecting their civilization onto other people's.
Okay.
the progressive left, however, believed in universalism. And this again comes from liberalism. This idea that everyone has the same nature, that human beings are, are just born as, how to put it, that's just born as, these empty notebooks that you can rewrite, so to speak. And you can take a person from Zanzibar or Amritsar or Baghdad, and if you just give them the right education, then they will be on the same level as the urban European of Paris and London. And so that project of exporting liberal European civilization. And I make here a distinction between that and then traditional European culture, which is a completely different thing. That was an idea of the progressive left. By the way, it hasn't stopped, because the American State Department is still tries to do that via its embassies throughout the former colonial world. But that's a different conversation. But so what they did is that they saw the necessity of destroying the indigenous education systems in order to replace them with modern education. And there's, for example, there's a lot of evidence in the writings of these colonial officers who say that we have to create a new age of Indians who are in appearance are still Indians, but in terms of their mentality they would be British, basically. And that's what that's where basically the whole idea of the coconut or the bounty comes from. This brown outside, white inside, right? And of course, what this meant is that the traditional educational systems were dismantled. And with it came, of course, the decay of traditional cultures and traditional arts. Because if you're like 1885, for example, in the Punjab, and you're reasonably intelligent, and there's two options, right? Either you go to the Lahore College to get an education to become a doctor or a lawyer and so on and so forth, and possibly get employment in the civil service, right, which is a stable situation, or you're going to get an education with some Udasi who might be on a wanted list of the British Empire. It's not difficult to make a choice. People will make the choice that is economically viable for them. And the problem is that the most intelligent minds in any community, the Hindu, Sikh, and the Muslim community in South Asia, they basically went for this Western Anglo-Saxon education at the expense of the traditional education. And this has one of the side effects is that the people who took over religious education were then low IQ people, were the people who, because if all the high IQ people go for the Western type of education that is offered in Western, so what's left? So everyone else basically either continues the job that they had before, or if they're like the second or the third son who cannot take over the father's I don't know, tailor shop or whatever, well, you can become a mullah or a granti or a pujari. And so what happens is that you have, in terms of the standards of religious education, you have a complete collapse, which explains the phenomena that we've been seeing in South Asia with the rise of Hindutva, with the rise of all kinds of identitarian fanaticisms, because the people who are leading these institutions are low IQ people. And this is only made worse in for example, in societies like, I mean, South Asian Islamic society, Muslim societies have a higher inbreeding rate than, for example, the rest of the Muslim world. And as we know, with inbreeding comes also low IQ. So, in the 16th century, 17th century, you have these like amazing Hellenistic philosophers that, ruled the day in Iran, right? People like Mullah Sadra, Mir Damad, Sheikh Bahai, and even before, Khawaja Nasruddin Tusi, and so on and so forth. All of that basically goes to rot, because what happens is that the most intelligent people in the society go for Western education, and then the religious seminaries, be they Sikh or Hindu or Muslim, they can't find recruits. So they have to lower their standards. And as they lower the standards, the most difficult subjects fall to the side. So, for example, in Islamic schools, they stop teaching, Sufism and philosophy, and they just stick to this very, Sharia-based understanding of religion, which is that, religion, just like, the Islamic religion, just like Judaism, just becomes the implementation of the correct implementation of rituals, right? And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing how low IQ people have taken over religion, and transformed it into this basically nightmare. And as I said, it's not exclusive to the Muslim community. It's also happened in Sikhism, right? I mean, and I know, like, you go to the Gurdwara, you try to have a conversation with your local Granthi, and most of the time it's a nightmare.
Thank you.
Because I mean, first of all, they haven't studied the languages that are required to, understand the Guru Granth Sahib, because, to study Sanskrit, you need a specific type of IQ, right? So when you have that happening, what happens is that, people start to make up their own rules, and they start to, and very often these rules are at the service of the people paying for the maintenance of the Gurdwara, for example, right? And this is again what I'm talking about, which is the plutocratic takeover of religion. When what happened, for example, in the Sikh reformist movement is that, it's that people, the rich people in the community basically are the ones who are going to manipulate the elections of the Gurdwara to be the ones who basically have the say in the Gurdwara. And so there's a good reason why people at the Gurdwara are not being taught a certain number of things. They're not being taught about spirituality. They're not being taught classical Hindustani music, which is normally required to play kirtan, right? And so on and so forth. Why? Because what you have is low IQ businessmen who basically have become the pradhans of the Gurdwara, and who are imposing their very limited and Philistine understanding of the religion onto everyone else in the community. And, and you can go somewhere else, right?
I love you, Punjabi. And
This is the tragedy,
yeah.
And this is, yeah, it's just this is the problem. It's a fundamental problem where there's an absence. I mean, in the early 2000s, when Kamarup and I we were part of this little clique in London, and we were constantly thinking about the ways that we could change this. How do we shortcut how do we bypass the power of these corrupt pradhans, these Malay Khalsa, right? How do we, and what we thought of, and I think that's the better option, which is that we have to bring Sikhi back to the home, which is that, we have to form small communities where, people gather in each other's homes, and there's a special room for the Guru Granth Sahib, And that's where we do kirtan, because if there's no real Sikhi being offered in the Gurdwara, right, then we still have the option of transforming our own homes into the Gurdwara, right? And that's basically one of the things that started flourishing at that time, because Puratan Sikhi, traditional Sikhi, could just not flourish in the institutionalized Singh Sabha reformist Gurdwara in the UK. So a lot of this traditionalist revival that has been going on since the 2000s, it's been the hard work of people who, brought the guru back to their homes, right? And said to themselves, okay, if we cannot practice the traditional Sikhi of our forefathers in the Gurdwara, then, well, let's transform our own homes into a Gurdwara. And that's what a lot of people did. And we're seeing the fruits now. I mean, because, like around 2007, around 2007, I just went my own way. I no longer had any contact with the Sikh community, and now that things have cooled down, and I've reestablished contacts with my Sikh friends. I'm getting these messages, like young people, who telling me, oh, you and Kamarup, you did so much, in terms of like opening up the way for Bharat and Sikh in the UK, and, I've been reading your stuff, and it's inspired me to learn Sanskrit and joining the Nirmalas, for example. And this would have been unimaginable 20 years ago. I mean, 20 years ago, Kamarup and I were literally on a blacklist. There were people who were actually trying to kill us. Yeah. 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 Uh, there was one young man who petrol bombed a car, where he thought I was inside the car, basically. Kamarup was almost shot at, Galaya ke, looking that how many sacrifices, we've been going through, and especially Kamarup, Babaji. How many sacrifices we had to go through, and it's not just student poverty. The situation where you have to you have to count the yellow coins in order to buy milk, right? But it's the persecution, it's the slanders, it's the threats, and the fact that nobody's listening to you, and but you're doing it all because you are just in love with this amazing man who lived at the end of the 17th century, whose name is Guru Gobind Singh, right? You're doing it for him because he's inspired you to do so. And thank God, Maharaj Kirpa, like we're seeing now everywhere now, in not just in the UK, but in even in Canada and everywhere else. It's somehow, for me, it's beautiful to see that all this hard work in the end it's been worth it. That you have all these young people who've they started. I mean, one thing I'm very happy about is the fact a lot of young people are learning Hindustani Sangeet. They're learning sitar, rabab, all these traditional instruments like sarangi and dilruba and tar shanai, because they recognize the amazing musical treasure there is, Gurbani Sangeet, right, which is actually its own family of classical Hindustani music. So I'm really happy that that's been, I'm saying this because, so I used to play the sitar, and I would show up at the Gurdwara, and I'm like, I want to participate in Kirtan, and people would just give me the dirty look, like, oh, sitar Hindu cheese, like, Barman cheese. And it's really disheartening. But now, I see that, a lot of young Sikh people are basically taking this seriously. And it's wonderful to see that. It's also wonderful to see that a growing number of young Sikh are basically practicing meditation, which is at the very core of the Sikh tradition. There is no, there's no such thing as Nam Simran without meditation. Nam Simran is meditation, right? It's the very core of the Sikh tradition. And it's very beautiful to see that, young people are connecting to that. And, holy, I hope that, all the damage that's been done, at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, where this reformist movement that literally mutilated the Sikh tradition, it's beautiful to see how the Sikh tradition, especially with its second and third generation, and outside of Punjab, is actually, recovering and healing. And hopefully, I hope to see the moment where all these young people who are now forming the elite of of the Sikh world, and that they basically can heal Punjab as well, because it's not just a religious question. Punjab is suffering immensely due to corruption, due to the oppression against the farmers. It's also, there's also, of course, the problem with female infanticide and so on and so forth. And my big hope is to see this young elite that is emerging now, and it's finally finding its root in the Sikh tradition, in the authentic Sikh tradition. I hope to see the day where we can finally see two blue Nishan Sabs, in front of the Akal Takht, and people being given the type of religion that they truly deserve. And there's this fundamental teaching that Guru Gobind Singh, was trying to convey to people, which is that you're the king, you are the state, and that's so fundamental, But this requires work. This
Yes.
requires sacrifice. This requires an education. But I think I'm very hopeful with this young, people like yourself and other people that I'm seeing. And even though I don't, my formally speaking, my religion is not Sikh, but I'm as woke people would call it, I'm an ally.
That's amazing.
So
I
so
am.
whatever I can do to help,
Yeah.
because I still have a very deep emotional attachment because I've spent, I mean, it's the years that I've spent inside the Sikh community were very intense. I've experienced absolutely wonderful
Wow.
things, and I think I wouldn't call it my friendship. I call it my brotherhood with Baba Kamaru Singh has been one of the most beautiful things in my life. He's a truly, I mean, because I know him very, very well. He's someone who deeply, deeply, deeply loves God and deeply loves the gurus and would do anything. If Guru Gobind Singh were to appear right now and say, Kamarup, you see that oven over there with this fire, just jump into the fire, Kamarup would do it. And it's such a shame that people cannot understand this devotion that he has. But so I had this type of wonderful experience. I also had other ones that were not so pleasant, but at the end of the day, what matters is what I've learned and what I've learned within the Sikh community. And if there are ways that I can give back, I'd be more than happy to help this movement of healing. You
Wow.
know.
Thank you for explaining it so much like that and the work that you put in. It's just something that I didn't even realize myself, just as a curious learner. That's what we are,
Mm.
delving into this as the deeper I go. And I really wanted to ask you actually about, so you did explain about at the start that people would say, yeah, Guru Nanak started a very simple path. What's the need of having all this complex languages when Sikh is supposed to be very simple? But I think you did explain how, especially after Guru Gobind Singh's time, how having this language, this kirtan understanding, develops the psyche, develops the mind, develops a person as a state. so they can effectively pull society up. And we've had people like Jasvir Kaur who really blessed to share that knowledge. I would just like you to touch on, because something we've not really touched on with Dr. Kamarup Singh, which I would have liked to, which was what specific practices were changed during the reform. So people might go to the Gurdwara and might see the Singh Sabha, but I know that I didn't really know, and a lot of my family or Sangat don't really know what this Singh Sabha means. So what kind of changes were made? I know you mentioned in the last live stream about Arti, the Dasam Granth, or even Sarbulu Granth, or even seen as othered. So we don't really know what's happened. Like you were mentioning that Hindu religion was constructed, the Sikh religion was reformed. Coming from this kind of mindset, we don't really know what that means. So if you could shed some light on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, the Sikh reformers were basically, their minds were shaped by liberalism and to some extent also by communism. The political techniques that they used, these political strategies that they used to take over the Sikh, the central Gurdwara, right, were the ones of the Russian Revolution, right? So you place women and children at the head of these demonstrations, and so that, if the security forces shoot, then of course the first victims will be women and children, and then you can play the victim cards, and then you claim a moral victory, and then take over the institutions that way. So there was a great deal of influence coming from communism, but also from liberalism, and that's why also, in terms of Punjabi politics, we've always seen that, for example, Prakash Singh Badal had always this sort of interesting relationship with the Communist Party as well, right? Because of this historical link between the communists and the Akali Dal. Now, what has changed is, let me explain it to you from the point of view of someone who's absolutely clueless and just physically enters the Gurdwara, right?
Yeah.
Like it's Sunday morning. You're going with your mom and dad to the Gurdwara, right? And so, and what do you see? You've had langar, obviously,
Yes.
and then now you enter the Darbar Sahib, right? You enter the Darbar Sahib, and what you notice, no, on the right hand you have men, on the left hand you have women, and now if you have this, you have this rectangular shaped, prayer hall, and at the end of it,
Guru Granth Sahib.
you have the Guru Granth Sahib. Then you have a podium, right, and then you have a stage on which people are playing kirtan. That's the church. That's a Protestant church. In the past, Gurdwara were not built this way. In the Gurdwara, in the past, and you'll see this if you go to places like, Fatehgarh Sahib or Anandpur Sahib, or even the Harmandir Sahib, the Gurdwara is square, and the Guru Granth Sahib is at the center of the room, right? He's like the Kaaba, of the Muslims, right? He's at the center. He's not that, at the back of the room. He's at the center, and people gather around the Guru Granth Sahib as families. There's no gender. Sorry, there's no sex separation, right? So you gather as family units around the Guru, not as all Bibian go this side, and like the men go this thing. That's not what's happening. If you've been to Amritsar, you'll notice when you go to if you go to Darbar Sahib, there's no separation. You have the Guru Granth Sahib in the middle, right? And then in front of the Guru Granth Sahib, on the side, not next to the Granth Sahib, in front of the Guru Granth Sahib, it's the Guru is being sung to, and people are participating, right?
So it's not to the Sangat, it's to the Guru.
Right. I mean, because here's the thing, if you sing, Guru Granth Ji Mani, or the Granth is the Guru, you have to treat the Granth as if it's Guru, right? So and this is a darbar. This is a court.
Court.
So the kirtan is being sung in direction of the guru, not from a
Ah,
stage towards the people, like it's the case, for example, in a Protestant church, right? So, so that's the first thing you'll notice, that the huge difference, right? And people come as family units, right? And this is very important because in traditional thinking, there's no such thing as an individual. You're not born as an individual. You didn't give birth to yourself. You are part of a family, and your family is part of a specific community. So in India, you're part of a caste, you're part of a brotherhood, you're part of the village community, and so on and so forth, right? These are natural communities that stem from the situation with which we were born with, and the guru respects that. And that's why in the traditional context, people sat with their families around the guru, not separated, right? This is fundamental. This is really fundamental.
so in terms
And
of,
the other thing, of course, is that
so I was
yeah,
just going to ask about caste, because you mentioned caste, and people might
yeah,
listen to this and might say, "Oh well, the guru's dispelled caste, and everybody's a state by themselves." So, um, but then going back to what we talked about, Indo-European and actual the family ties and the quote from your blog. So, how would you answer that mindset when somebody
yeah,
when somebody approaches it like this?
yeah. I've always found this. I mean, I write this introduction of my thesis. I find it always very comical when these like Sikh Missionary Society people and Singh Sabi go like, "There's no caste in Sikhism. We don't have caste discrimination." Okay, well, all right. So we have John here who's just converted to Sikhism. Would you marry your daughter to him? Ah, oh, okay. So caste does exist.
Mm.
And and it's very simple. It's like you open any Punjabi newspaper, like Des Pardes, for example. You open up, and you have I mean, let's stop fooling ourselves. Caste exists. What the gurus taught was that contrary to other types of religious movements in India, caste was not an impediment for attaining enlightenment and moksha. But the gurus did say that there was a necessity of people behaving in a brotherly way to one another. But at no point did the gurus do anything to destroy the institution of the caste. And that's and that doesn't mean that they were in favor of caste discrimination either. But the gurus simply recognize that caste is basically a reality of Indic society. The gurus never married outside of their caste. If caste was such an issue for them that they wanted to abolish it, well, the first thing the gurus would have done, like Guru Har Rai had 8 wives, right? Well, it's very easy. You just marry a woman from each caste to make a point that caste doesn't count anymore. But he didn't do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Guru Gobind Singh had 3 wives. Why didn't he marry three women from different castes if he wanted to make such a point about caste being not having a place in Sikhi? All the gurus married within the Khatri subcaste of Kshatriyas. And that's just and not only that, is that the people who officiated the wedding ceremony were Brahmins, were Sikh Brahmins. The Shibar family, they were Sikh Brahmins. They were the pujaris, they were the purohits of the gurus. So, but they were Sikhs, so they didn't worship idols or anything like that. But they were Brahmins, and so when the gurus got married, they were the ones officiating, preparing the havan fire and getting the gurus married around the fire. But the gurus did not marry outside of their caste. And
Khalsa.
I'm saying this because, sorry.
Now, I had to quite some questions there before you go on. So some people might spring to mind, okay, when the Khalsa was created, there's 5 different people from each caste, and also they might wonder, okay, then what are the benefits of having this natural organic caste structure?
Yeah.
Because people have seen it from this Western lens that, oh, it's backwards and it doesn't provide social mobility, and they would see it in that way. Whereas
Yeah.
on the other side, they might see it another way. So if you can help
Yeah.
us.
Well, the Khalsa is something else, right?
Mm,
So this whole caste thing, works if you're a Sajdari, right? But here's the thing. In the traditional understanding of the Khalsa as it exists amongst the Nahangs, right? The Akali Nahangs and Khalsa, which is the real Khalsa. The moment you've taken Amrits, your father becomes Guru Gobind Singh, and your mother becomes Mata Sahib Deva, and you become, and this is very important, you become a Raghuvamshi Kshatriya because of your father. Your father, Guru Gobind Singh, is a Raghuvamshi Kshatriya. So you're part of that now. But you're a warrior who's also a farmer, a craftsman, and who's also a priest. And so you're a complete human being. The Khalsa is a new model, but it's the leadership model, right? Whatever the rest of society does with its caste and with that's okay. That's outside of the whole thing of the Akali Nahangs and Khalsa. But within the Akali Nahangs and Khalsa, yeah, then there's then these there's this model of this new human being, so to speak, who's a complete human being. Now, was this implemented historically in terms of intermarriages? There is some evidence that there were intermarriages, amongst the Khalsa of people who were originally from different castes, but these were old habits that were difficult to break as well, right? Because I mean, for example, I used to know someone who came from a Ramgarhia family who married a girl from a Khatri family, and even though both of them were Punjabis, there were such differences in culture,
mm,
right? That the two families couldn't get along because of that. Khatris are educated in a specific way. Ramkari have, because of historical reasons, have another way of raising up their kids, right? So it's this fine line between, is caste a is caste still relevant nowadays? I mean, that's the. I mean, let's put it this way. It's the question is not so much whether caste has a role in Sikhism. That's we've solved. We've looked into that. The question is this: is that first of all, there needs to be there's a difference between Varna, which is the four classes of classic India, right? You have the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and then the Shudras, right? And then you have the caste, which is a different thing, was a Jat, right? And then, and people say, well, but the caste system didn't have social mobility. Well, as an individual, no, there was no social mobility, but there was mobility of the caste. A caste, if it changed its profession and if it's changed its lifestyle, it could go up or down the social ladder of the varnas, for example. So there's a very famous family of or group of families of Brahmins in Himachal Pradesh who became very famous painters of the Kangra school of painting. Because they became painters, they lost their status as Brahmins. So became classified as Shudras, basically, and so the entire caste, those families, all of them were declassified as Shudras because they became painters. So the thing is this, does it still make sense to, call yourself a Ramgarhia if you're a banker, for example? Does it still make sense meant to call yourself a Jat if you're a computer engineer? These are these are interesting questions to ask. And the other thing is that, okay, how can we interpret the institution of the Khalsa as a way of solving that issue without betraying betraying the sense of tradition. And that's, I think, a conversation that people need to have, and that people need to, solve. I don't have the answers because, I don't have a dog in the fight, right? And I think it would be very indecent, on my part to, provide answers. Also, I'm an Evolian traditionalist, so I do believe in the necessity of hierarchies. But for example, I I adhere to Julius Evola's criticism of the Indian caste system in a sense that I think that what undermined Indian civilization was the supremacy of the Brahmins over all the other classes. Why? Because priests need other people's charity, basically, in order to live, which means that they're at the mercy of the one who has money. Now, what then happens is that it's the economically powerful class that basically, get to manipulate the priestly class. And over time, the priestly class also became one of these Banya type money lending, classes. And that basically ruins Indic society, and which also is I think the reason why Guru Gobind Singh wanted to kick the anthill and change all of that, and bring back this old Indo-European supremacy of the warrior over the priest, and this necessity of bringing back warrior spirituality. Because Gal ke, people think that the Khalsa is, the ideal of the Sant Sipahi is that, good boy ban ja, huh? Then, but also, be a little bit of the warrior, take a few karate classes. Like, no, that's not warrior spirituality. Warrior spirituality is that you wake up in the morning and for a good 10 minutes meditate on different ways of doing, so that for the rest of the day you consider yourself to be dead. It's not the same thing. The spirituality of the priest is one thing. The spirituality of the warrior is a completely different thing altogether. There's no one for all spirituality. There's different types of spirituality that vary with the types of personality. And a warrior it's a specific type of soul, and that requires a specific type of spirituality. And it's not for everyone. And that's why the whole idea of the Khalsa, it's an elite. It's not for everyone. That's why when people are asking me, but do you have a problem with bankers? I don't have a particular problem with that. Society needs in order to function, it needs a service class, right? If you work at a bank, you're providing a service, right? But that disqualifies you from being part of that elite, and vice versa. Like being part of the Khalsa disqualifies you from engaging in non-productive capitalism.
It's very interesting that you say.
Very important because
So I think we broke off a little bit there. It's very interesting that you said there's different types of
yeah.
spirituality depending on your personality, because I think that's not something people talk about a lot as well. That, about these specific essences, at least that I haven't come across, that that actually relates to your personality. So I think that's also quite an important thing. But back to my original question, which was kind of the practices, because I know when my mum was younger in the 1960s or 70s, they actually had incense, for example, in the Gurdwara, or I know that they do arti. I've been part of an arta, and it's just like it's a powerful metaphysical process that you actually feel, and and the point that during Reformation, effectively, the deep understanding has been taken away. Also, like you mentioned, Nam Simran. Growing up, I didn't really know the depth of Nam Simran until I did like a meditation class down the road, and then I was like, okay, this is actually within Sikhi, right? So, kind of speaking into the practices that were kind of changed. I don't know if it was on purpose or just as a result of, like you said, about the IQ leading in
Yeah,
certain
yeah,
parties.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the spirituality of the Akalina Hangs and Khalsa, right? Uh, it's the combination of this yogic meditation with martial arts
Ah.
and the idea of confronting yourself with these initiatory experiences with death.
Mm.
And that's basically fundamental. And so it's not so much a question of practice as it is a question of attitudes,
Mm-hmm.
right? How you see the world. And also people forget, that the totemic um, animal of the Khalsa is the lion, right? So in a sense, you have to you have to incorporate within yourself the soul of the lion. And so what does that mean? What does it mean to be a lion? In a sense, what does it mean to have the type of charisma of Rob that when you speak with such authority, even if it's just one sentence, that an entire room listens to you and takes notes and respects it. Because it's not just about the weapons; it's also about developing this stage, this vibe, this effulgence, right, that you develop, out of this combination of meditative practice and the martial arts. And here's the important thing, and it also comes with a body type.
Mm.
You know, and the body is extremely important, and that's why you cannot, you know, this type of spirituality requires that you have to, sculpt your body into the body of a god, basically. Plato said very famously that no man should ever live in such a way that he doesn't witness the ultimate limits of his body. And Plato was not his real name. Plato was uh, Plato was a nickname as the big shoulder guy, basically what it means
Aha.
in Greek, because he was a boxer who won at the Olympic Games. So he was a philosopher, but he was also a boxer, and is very famously during debates, whenever his adversary would stutter, he would just flex, and show off his muscles, and that's something that the sort of like some spirituality that's taken over in Sikh society has completely abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
Because nowadays, like, I mean, I love sons, I love, the great people. But again, it's not for everybody. I mean, this sort of sun spirituality, it's perfect for people who are in the service industry.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're a, if you're a cashier at the local supermarket, and you're a devotee of this sant or the other sant, and you're vegetarian and you do nam simran, fantastic, wonderful, because you don't need to pay attention to the body. But if you follow the teaching of the Kalina Singh Khalsa, you have to turn your body into that of a god, of a Greek god. That's required of you, because the body, the body lives in reality, and the body is always honest. And you may talk a lot about spirituality, but you're dead, or your absence of muscles will say something else, right? It's this very important thing. The Akali Nangsing Khalsa is an embodied spirituality, and you practice your spirituality with your body. You carry the Panchka cards with your body. The body is so important, and it needs to be that of a Greek god. And of course, people say, "Oh, where did Guru Gobind Singh say that?" I'm like, okay. You can't fight the battles that Guru Gobind Singh did. if you don't develop a specific type of body, which is not that of like the heavy muscled um, bodybuilder that we see being glorified in these like Punjabi rap videos. That's not at all that. You need a flexible body. But I mean, as I always tell people, if you look for an ideal, Brad Pitt in Troy, or Alexander Skarsgård in The Northman. That's the body type, and and it's hard and it's difficult, but it's worth it. I mean, people forget in the spiritual centers of the Udasis, they're called akara. Akara is originally it's a gymnasium where you practice, kushti, right? You practice wrestling, and you lifting weights and stuff. And why? Because spiritual practice it's an exercise. The physical akara, you practicing martial arts, and the spiritual akara, you're practicing the martial arts of your mind. And so the Khalsa is all about combining both. It's the ideal of the spiritual warrior.
Wow. I think you've given us so much to digest on, certainly me as well. Um, I'm so grateful for your time. If we could finish on, and this could be a whole podcast in itself, but I want to respect your time. And I think it's important to talk about is Europe and the West. So we had a previous podcast on actually colonialization of Britain and indigenous Britain, and actually why it's so important to connect with nature and be in our bodies, as you say, have that the difference between being a warrior and being a soldier. But essentially, what is the difference between the West and Europe in the contents of this natural and pagan intelligence? Because me being in Scotland, I'm also on a journey of trying to connect to how do I connect to the land here? How can I be embodied here as well? Not obviously, I'm not in Punjab right now. I'm here in UK, and I think a lot of people are also seeking this connection.
Yeah. Well, so very often when people speak of colonialism, they very often use the expression of the West, the collective West.
Yeah.
But since World War II, there's been amongst European nationalists, there's been a great deal of people, especially amongst the French nationalists. There's been a lot of talk of separating the West from Europe. So what is Europe? Europe is a land. It's a land civilization that is the continuation of Rome, and it has its roots in Greek and Roman antiquity, but also the Germanic and Celtic and Slavic heritages, right? So that's Europe. The West is basically the Anglo-Saxon Sea Empire, and with basically, how do you call it, Judeo-Protestant liberalism as its main ideology, right? The power of the Anglo-Saxon Empire, it's the combination of Protestant power with basically the arrival with how to put it, with the alliance that was created by Cromwell between the Protestant world and the banking families that were the Sephardic banking families that were driven out of Portugal and that found refuge in London. So it's the combination of these two. And so the West is transnational. It's not rooted. It's a sea empire. It's rooted in liberalism. It's rooted in plutocracy. And it is basically to Europe what Carthage was to Rome. They're mortal enemies. And I'm saying this as a European because during World War II, the things that were inflicted upon Europe by the so-called allies made a lot of people realize that these people were not our liberators or were not our friends. I'm talking here about, the destruction of several German cities, for example, like Dresden. Talking about the mass rapes that happened not only by the Russian armies but also by the Western Allied armies that, when they came to France and other countries, they inflicted a lot of that sort of stuff on people. The systematic torture of and starvation of soldiers that were part of the Axis. And of course the destruction of our culture, because America and the Anglo-Saxon world, they rewrote our constitutions, they rewrote our education systems, and there were, for example, quotas of how many American movies had to be shown every single week on television. How much? Yeah. This.
So it's like a soft power from the West. This kind of links back to the
Yeah,
MTV
absolutely.
reference you were talking about.
Yeah, because before that, Italy and France had a thriving cinema industry. They had a thriving, music industry, and then the Americans come along, and then by law they impose these quotas, which is that like for a certain number of decades, French people and European people in general have to, by law, they're mandated to basically have a certain percentage of American movies that have to be shown on television and in the cinemas, right? So this is cultural genocide. When I grew up as a kid, my family was very traditional. We were not allowed to wear jeans. We were not allowed to listen to pop, rock, and any of that type of music. We were only allowed to listen to classical European music. And then I rebelled. I mean, and and that's the thing about America. It's that it presents itself as this permanent teenage rebellion against tradition.
I never thought of it like that.
And like so and it's perpetually in this mode all the time, well, tradition is so boring, tradition can go fuck itself, and that's export America. I would never dare to confuse, because there's a tradition in America. I mean, I visited the South, and there's a lot of very cultured people in America who also have their own rooted culture. If you go to rural America, you'll find that. And so there's the struggle between the West and Europe, and at the moment Europe is losing. But there's a revival of European consciousness. People are coming back to their roots, and be it by converting back to traditional Catholicism, so not modern Catholicism, but traditional Catholicism, or by exploring paganism, or by converting to Russian Orthodoxy, and that it's very encouraging. It has also many ways in which this could go wrong as well, So I'm one of the people who wants to make sure that it goes into the direction of this being not only a revival of our peoples, but also that this be part of a worldwide awakening of all cultures to recover, their own roots.
Mm-hmm.
I want our brothers and sisters in Japan to, do that as well, to recover their tradition. I want our brothers and sisters in China to do the same. I want our brothers and sisters in Iran to do the same, and in Latin America and so on and so forth, because God created this variety of cultures, and all of that needs to be cherished, and so this movement should not come out of a place of hate. It's not about hating modern Anglo-Saxon culture. If Americans want to do whatever they want in their own country, I don't have a problem with that. But I just want to be able to live in an environment where I can transmit the culture and the customs of my ancestors to my children, but always from a place of love and celebration. And this is where I think, and I think we'll finish on that note. This is what I think the function of the Colonial Singh Khalsa in Europe and in the UK is, which is that as this, it should be a catalyst, because obviously, from my own experience, I think that expecting Europeans to, convert to Sikhism is unrealistic, because what is implied with that is that, it's this impossible task of, becoming Punjabi, basically, right? And there's also the fact that, you probably are not going to find a spouse anyways, if within the Punjabi community. So why not do something else, which is that, the Kalina Singh Khalsa should be like a catalyst, telling the native populations of the British Isles, be they British, English, Welsh, Irish, Scottish, saying, we have our own warrior spirituality tradition. You have yours, but you've forgotten it. We're just here to remind you of those traditions so that together we can liberate ourselves from this oppression that is, from this tyrannical power that's oppressing people all over the world. And I think that's the aim that, I think is feasible. And it's also beautiful, and would be a wonderful contribution if that would be the ideal, for the Akali Nahang Singh tradition in Europe and in the British Isles. That'd be wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
It's such an honor to sit down with you and have this time. I'm very grateful for this. I think we've been through so much today,
Yeah.
from the education system to the Reformation to Europe and the West, and I'm sure the listeners are very grateful for your time as well. Would you like to leave any last message for maybe some people of our generation, perhaps the parents as well watching this, and also let people know where they can find you if they want to reach out and connect as well?
Okay, so I can be found on Instagram. My username is Ludwig Traditionalista. I think you can probably put it
I'll put
in.
everything in the description below. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Young people, I would say the following. Well, actually, two things. First of all, if you don't invite God in the spring of your life, they're very small. It's very unlikely that he'll come in the winter of your lives. So use your youth in any way possible to focus on the divine. And I mean here, create a routine of practicing meditation, half an hour to an hour a day. Trust me, it'll transform your life. If you're a young man, quit porn. It's there to literally destroy you. Avoid it at all costs. Educate yourself. Learn classical languages. Learn Sanskrit. Learn Persian. Learn martial arts. And proper martial arts that you can also use in daily life. Learn how to grow things. Grow. Try to grow as much as your own food as possible. Learn a manual craft, and behave in such a way that your ancestors on the other side can look at you with pride. That's the most important. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it's such a pleasure. I'd love to have you on again sometime to share your infinite knowledge.
The honor was all mine. It was all mine.